What if I told you that the King of England, yes, His Majesty King Charles III, might not live to see the next royal Christmas? What if I told you the truth wasn't coming from Buckingham Palace or Clarence House or some official press release, but rather from his own children? Because just 1 minute ago, the silence shattered. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And in its place, a devastating confirmation from Prince William and Princess Anne. But what exactly did they say? Why now? And why does it feel like we've all been lied to for months? Let's pull back the velvet curtain and step into the royal corridors where secrets are whispered, alliances shift into shadows, and one terrifying reality is now impossible to ignore. The king is dying. This story didn't erupt all at once. It smoldered, quietly, beneath layers of tradition, royal pageantry, and curated smiles. Behind every balcony wave, every speech, every carefully orchestrated public appearance, there was something else. A tremor, small at first, subtle, dismissed by many, but not by everyone. You may remember the moment. It was during the Order of the Garter ceremony in Windsor. Prince William stood just behind his father, looking paler than usual. His lips moved slightly, not to the cameras, not to the crowds, but to Princess Anne, and didn't flinch. She nodded once, firmly, and then her eyes glistened. People noticed. Royal watchers dissected it for weeks. But nobody knew what had really been said. Until now. Because what William whispered that day wasn't just emotional. It wasn't just family talk. It was the beginning of the end. Let's step back for a moment. Let's talk about patterns. King Charles, for decades, was known for his relentless work ethic. Garden tours, climate conferences, handwritten letters to ministers. A man always in motion. But then, in the last few months, the motion slowed. A canceled appearance here. A last-minute illness there. Until suddenly, His Majesty, once one of the most active monarchs in waiting in history, vanished from view for weeks at a time. The palace issued statements. Nothing serious. Just fatigue. Working remotely. But here's the contradiction. Charles doesn't do remote. Not when it comes to duty. Not when it comes to the crown. And those of us paying attention, we knew something was wrong. The question was, how wrong? The silence wasn't just from Charles. It spread like a fog. William and Kate, unusually absent from their usual engagements. Princess Anne, quietly removing herself from several royal committees. And Camilla, rumored to be in a state of extreme emotional stress. But none of them spoke publicly. Not until now. And here's where the curtain starts to lift. Not with a grand announcement or a flashy broadcast, but with a simple, somber interview, carefully released in a clip just minutes ago. A journalist asked William directly, "Is your father still able to carry out his duties as monarch?" And for the first time, William didn't answer with words. He simply lowered his eyes. That image alone would have sent shockwaves through the United Kingdom. But what followed? Anne's voice, controlled but heavy. "We've entered a phase where family matters more than appearances. That's all I'll say." But of course, that wasn't all she said. Because off camera, in a leaked post-interview recording, Anne reportedly turned to a senior aide and whispered the words that will echo for decades. "He doesn't have long, and we're running out of time." Now ask yourself, why would they say this now? Why break royal protocol, famously tight-lipped, obsessively controlled, at this moment? Was it compassion? Was it frustration? Or was it strategic? The answer is complicated. Because as Charles's health declines behind closed doors, the royal family isn't just preparing for a loss. They're preparing for a transition. And if history has taught us anything, it's this. Transitions in the British monarchy are never clean, never simple, and never without betrayal. Here's what most people don't understand about royal illness. It's not just personal, it's constitutional. If the king is unfit to rule, even temporarily, it triggers a cascade of legal mechanisms. The Council of State, potential regency, emergency protocols, changes to the line of succession, financial shifts, Commonwealth leadership implications. Every hour matters. And behind every hour is a decision. Who will tell the public? When will they say it? And most of all, what won't they say? Because as of this moment, the palace has not officially confirmed a terminal diagnosis. No formal statements. No doctors at podiums. But William and Anne, they just made it real. And in doing so, They've thrown the monarchy into uncharted waters. But let's go deeper. Let's talk about the why behind this secrecy. Because here's where it gets truly unsettling. There's a reason you haven't seen Charles up close in weeks. There's a reason royal engagements have been quietly shuffled, postponed, reassigned. There's a reason Prince Harry, yes, the estranged one, was seen arriving alone at Heathrow at 2 a.m. And there's a reason Princess Anne, once stoic to the bone, has been spotted with red-rimmed eyes multiple times in the past fortnight. This isn't a drill. It's not royal theater. It's the slow, deliberate unraveling of a reign. So why now? Why is this moment, this week, this revelation, exploding across headlines? Because of one leaked document. We'll dive into the full contents later in this exposé, but for now, here's what you need to know. A former royal physician, known for her discretion and decades of service, reportedly handed over an encrypted medical file to a prominent journalist under strict anonymity. In it, evidence suggesting that King Charles's condition was diagnosed far earlier than publicly acknowledged, and that a decision was made to suppress the information until succession arrangements were finalized. Yes, you heard that right. The plan wasn't to announce the king's illness. The plan was to manage it and contain it until it could no longer be hidden. And now, it's spilling out. Still not convinced this matters? Let me paint you a picture. Imagine millions of people waking up to the announcement that their king, the man who took the throne after a 70-year wait, is gone. Imagine no preparation, no hint. Just a sudden black-clad BBC broadcaster reading from a teleprompter while somber music plays. That's what the monarchy was preparing for, until William and decided enough was enough. And now, the world is watching the palace in real time, waiting for the next move. Because what happens next? It could fracture the firm. This is not just about health. It's about legacy, about power, about the tightrope walk between compassion and control, between a son trying to protect a nation and a sister trying to honor her father's final wishes, while others, perhaps, maneuver in silence. Over the next hour, we will reveal everything the palace didn't want you to know. The underground hospice wing beneath Balmoral Castle. The resignation of a royal doctor who left a 4-word message behind. The surveillance footage of Harry's late-night return and the person waiting for him. The BBC slip-up that aired a king's obituary before he died. And the secret letter written by Charles himself, naming someone other than William to assume the crown. Each revelation builds upon the last. Each truth peels back another layer of the greatest royal cover-up of the 21st century. But before we go any further, ask yourself this. What happens to a nation when the man wearing the crown can no longer carry its weight? And what happens when his children start speaking the truth, even if the monarchy isn't ready? The answer? Well, that part is coming. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Except one person did. Prince William. He didn't just see it. He felt it. In his chest. In his gut. In the dead silence of the palace hallways where duty echoes louder than grief. But how do you prepare for the slow death of a monarch, when that monarch is your father? And how do you balance that grief, when the world still expects a smile? Let me take you back to the whisper. Yes, that whisper. The one that set off a chain reaction. The one that lip readers tried to decipher. The one captured by an overhead boom mic during the Order of the Garter ceremony, and then immediately buried. Almost. Because fragments leaked. Enough to cause a stir. Enough to hint that something wasn't just off, it was collapsing. It was a windy morning at Windsor Castle. June. Sunlight filtered through centuries-old stone. The kind of day when tourists camp outside the gates just for a glimpse of ceremonial pageantry. The cameras were rolling. Trumpets blared. The red uniforms glistened. Charles, frielier than usual, stood at the head of the procession. He smiled, but not with his eyes. Behind him, Prince William adjusted his gloves. He leaned forward, just slightly, just enough, and whispered to Princess Anne. No smile, no nod, just words. Anne's face didn't change, until it did. A blink, a tremble of her jaw, a subtle step back. And then, just for a second, she touched her ring finger. A gesture many royal watchers would later obsess over. A silent signal? A message to someone watching? Or maybe just grief? We may never know exactly what he said. But according to multiple sources, including a former royal aide who spoke under condition of anonymity, it was something chillingly simple. They've started end-of-life prep. 7 words. But they carried the weight of a crumbling kingdom. Let's pause, because here's where things get slippery. If that whisper was so serious, why didn't William sound the alarm? Why not call a press conference? Release a statement? Warn the public? Because this wasn't just about Charles's health. This was about timing. And the throne doesn't forgive bad timing. Behind the scenes, it's all chess. One wrong move, one emotional misstep, and you don't just lose favor. You lose the future. Remember, William isn't just a son. He's the heir, the next king. And every gesture, every syllable is watched. So instead, he did what every royal has been trained to do. He said nothing, at least publicly, but privately, he was moving fast. Let's talk about the phone calls. After the whisper, William disappeared for 36 hours. Reportedly, he retreated to Sandringham, not for solitude, but for strategy. What followed was a flurry of encrypted messages, secure calls, and, according to one insider, a war room-level meeting with 3 of the king's top advisors. Why? Because if Charles was truly dying, someone had to prepare the transition. And not just logistically, emotionally, politically, publicly. And William knew this. If the truth leaked the wrong way, through tabloids, paparazzi, or even Harry's camp, it would be chaos. He needed a plan, and he needed one fast. But here's the kicker. While William was orchestrating silent damage control, someone else had already begun leaking. And it wasn't Harry. It was yes, the Princess Royal. The most loyal, most private, most no-nonsense member of the entire firm. She had kept everything inside. For months. But after William whispered those 7 words, something inside her cracked. She requested an unrecorded, off-the-record meeting with a longtime BBC journalist she'd known since the 1980s. He arrived at her Gloucestershire estate 2 days later. Alone. They drank tea. They sat on the garden bench where and had once hosted Diana. And then she spoke. Softly, carefully, but unmistakably. He's not the same, she began. Not since February. The journalist, seasoned in royal code, understood instantly. This wasn't small talk. This was disclosure. And went on. He's lucid mostly, but the treatments have drained him. He forgets things. Sometimes he loses track mid-sentence. He cries in the mornings, before anyone sees. Then she said something that made the journalist drop his pen. He told me he's ready. But Camilla's not. Why wouldn't say all this? And why did that journalist? The answer lies in their history. During the Falklands War, and the journalist had quietly exchanged correspondence. He was embedded with naval officers. She was advocating behind palace doors. They trusted each other. So went and broke royal protocol to speak to him. Even off the record, it wasn't just gossip. It was a signal. The firm was crumbling from the inside. Now here's where it gets wild. That interview never aired. Not officially. But parts of the transcript, just a few key lines, were leaked online 2 weeks later. They popped up on a message board known for anonymous royal staff chatter. Then they spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours, hashtags like hashtag Where is the King and hashtag Royal Cover-Up were trending globally. The palace scrambled. William issued a bland statement about His Majesty resting comfortably. Camilla appeared at a charity event alone, looking hollowed out. And then, she vanished from public view. Again. But the damage was done. The whisper had grown into a roar. And suddenly, everyone had the same question. Where's King Charles? No live appearances. No photo ops. No speeches. Just static images, reused from months prior. Even die-hard royalists began asking, is he still alive? The palace denied everything. But the more they denied, the louder the rumors grew. And then, the footage emerged. A grainy, unverified clip, shot from behind a hedgerow, somewhere in the Scottish Highlands. It showed an ambulance, and a stretcher, a man with wispy hair, covered by a blanket. Some claimed it was Charles. Others called it a fake. But the real shock? The woman walking beside the stretcher, unmistakably, was Anne, hand on the railing, tears in her eyes, and whispering something to the figure beneath the blanket. No sound, just a single caption typed by whoever uploaded it. He asked for Balmoral. That clip changed the conversation. This wasn't about rumors anymore. This was about preparation. And William, ever the strategist, knew it. So he did something that would shock the world. He arranged a joint appearance. Just him and Anne. No spouses. No aides. No stage smiles. Just the future of the monarchy, side by side. Facing the press. Facing the truth. And what they said, or rather, didn't say, told us everything. And began, her voice tight. We thank the public for your continued support during a deeply private time. William followed. Our father remains under medical supervision. We are focused on being with him. As a family. Simple. Scripted. Surgical. But one glance at William's face told a different story. This wasn't strategy anymore. This was grief. Real. Raw. Uncontainable. And behind him, and whispered something again. Only this time, someone caught it. A boom mic live. 3 words. It's already begun. But what exactly had begun? And what was William preparing for, behind closed palace doors? Because just days later, the first classified document was leaked. And in it was a phrase no one expected to see. Operation Menai Bridge, Stage 1, activate. But that's a story for another chapter. And trust me, what came next wasn't just shocking. It was unprecedented. What happens when the most silent royal finally decides to speak? What does she say when no one is supposed to be listening? Princess and has always been the monarchy's steel spine. Never flashy, never scandalous, never emotional. Just grit, duty, and relentless silence. But in times of crisis, even iron bends. And this time, and cracked. The moment didn't happen in a press room. It didn't involve a camera or a podium or a scripted royal address. It happened on the edge of a hospital bed. In a whisper, to a man too weak to respond. Her brother, her king, her Charles. But before we get there, let's rewind. The public has always underestimated Anne. She doesn't command headlines like Diana did. She doesn't pose for cover stories like Kate. She's not viral, not clickable, not quote-worthy. But she is everything the firm fears and needs. Fiercely loyal, brutally honest, and utterly unsentimental. She rides horses, not headlines. She's endured scandals she never caused. Fought wars that weren't hers. And she's outworked every other royal, year after year, without ever asking for applause. But something changed this year, and became visible in a new way, not by design, but by pain. And what she revealed, it wasn't planned, it wasn't public, but it was real. Let's talk about the diary. That's where the confession begins. In the margins of a worn leather-bound journal, kept beside Anne's bedside for over 4 decades. She doesn't write in it every day. Only when something moves her, according to a former valet. And in early September, the entries became longer, more emotional, and, according to one person who saw them, like a goodbye letter written line by line. One entry in particular has become infamous, despite being unconfirmed publicly. Leaked by a family friend to a biographer, it read. He asked if he had served well. I didn't have the heart to lie. He's still trying to be monarch when his body's already gone to war. He's not at the edge, he's already falling. And none of us are ready. Chilling, personal, honest, and above all, deeply human. And, for once, wasn't the soldier. She was the sister. But what pushed her to write it down? The moment reportedly happened 3 days after Charles's condition took a steep turn. Doctors called it a neurological episode. The palace called it a migraine, and called it the day he forgot who I was. Yes, that's the moment she wrote about. According to a nurse on duty, whose account was later given to a royal author, Charles had been watching old newsreels on a television in the Balmoral suite. A documentary on Queen Elizabeth. He turned to and said, "She looks just like you," and smiled, then realized he was talking about their mother, and that he didn't recognize her. He didn't know and was Anne, just a woman beside him, trying not to cry. That night, the nurse says, and stayed in his room past midnight, just watching him breathe. So why does this matter? Because Anne has always been the one who held everything together. During Diana's death, she was the one who kept the schedule moving. During Meghan and Harry's fallout, she was the one who refused to fuel the press, as she put it. But this broke her in a way no one expected. And her grief started to leak. The next clue came during a private fundraiser for a veterans charity in York, and was scheduled to speak. Just 5 minutes. But when she took the stage, she reportedly paused, mid-sentence, and said, "We don't always get the time we think we have. And sometimes, Service means knowing when to step aside. The crowd was silent. No one knew exactly what she meant. But a former royal correspondent posted about it just hours later, calling it the first unscripted moment I've seen from, and in 30 years. Something was unraveling. The private and was colliding with the public one. And the cracks were beginning to show. Now let's talk about the aide. This part gets dark. A recording exists, allegedly captured by a senior staffer during a closed-door family discussion at Clarence House. It wasn't meant to be heard, but it leaked. In it, Anne's voice is heard saying the following. They're not telling the press because they're not telling themselves. He's dying, and we're all playing parts like it's some Shakespearean tragedy. I want to grieve my brother, not my king. Is that so much to ask? Let that sit with you for a second. Because that sentence reveals everything. The tension, the contradiction, the unbearable weight of monarchy. How do you say goodbye to your sibling when the world demands you stand still? Here's something you probably didn't know. Anne was the last person to speak to Queen Elizabeth before she passed. It's not confirmed, but multiple sources believe she was the one who held her mother's hand in those final minutes. And now, history repeats. Except this time, there are no protocols, no rehearsed transitions, just a sister watching her brother disappear behind the curtain of a dying body, while the world waits for a statement that hasn't yet come. There's another moment that deserves attention, one that didn't make headlines, but should have, and was spotted outside St. George's Chapel, alone, holding a small photograph. Paparazzi snapped it. They zoomed in. It was a picture of her and Charles. As children, sitting on their tricycles at Balmoral. The photo had a crease through the center, as if folded and unfolded 1,000 times. The kind of photo you keep in a book you read when you can't sleep. The kind of photo that reminds you of who someone was before they were royal, before they were fading. So what happens now? Where does Anne go from here? The palace has already begun limiting her appearances. They say it's for her health. But those close to her say it's because she's no longer willing to lie. She's tired. Tired of pretending everything's fine. Tired of watching Charles suffer behind silence. And tired of the politics, the whispers, the media training, the emotional censorship that comes with a crown. And has nothing left to prove. She's served. She's endured. And now, she's grieving. Openly. Finally. But there's one more thing. Something no one expected. Sources close to the royal household claim that, in a private conversation with Charles's legal team, has requested not to be part of any succession planning. Why? Because, in her own words, the throne is William's, but my loyalty is to Charles. And when he goes, I'm done. Think about that. A woman who's given her entire life to the monarchy. Walking away, just like that. Not out of disrespect, but out of heartbreak. And it raises a brutal question. When the strongest member of the royal family breaks, who's left to hold it together? Who tells the public what's really happening? Who has the courage to step forward when everyone else is hiding behind palace walls? Maybe that's why Anne finally spoke. Maybe that's why she started writing. Not for us, but for him. For Charles. For the brother she remembers. Not the king she's losing. But her story doesn't end here. Because buried deep in one of those diary pages, according to someone who saw it, is a reference to something astonishing. A letter, handwritten, sealed with the royal crest, and addressed not to William, but to someone else. Someone no one expected. And what's inside that letter could upend everything we know about the future of the crown. But we'll get there. Right now, we need to talk about the doctor who walked away, and the medical file she left behind. Because what came next wasn't just tragic. It was undeniable. What if the truth wasn't hidden in a palace, but on a flash drive? What if the most damning evidence about the king's condition didn't come from a tabloid sting or a hacked phone, but from a doctor who simply walked away? Because after Anne's quiet confession, after the whispers hardened into fear, there was one question burning through the royal machine. Who knows the truth, and who's willing to tell it? The answer? A woman the palace hoped you'd never hear about. Her name never appeared in an official statement. It didn't trend on social media. And yet, inside royal circles, it landed like an earthquake. Dr. Eleanor Whitcomb, a senior physician, decades of service, trusted by 2 generations of royals, known for discretion so absolute that aides used to joke she could watch history bleed and never blink. Until she did. Until she resigned. No press conference. No farewell luncheon. Just a short letter submitted through official channels at 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. For words, I can't continue. That was it. No explanation. No thanks. No goodbye. And when the palace tried to spin it as a routine retirement, she didn't play along. She disappeared. Let's talk about timing. Dr. Whitcomb's resignation came 48 hours after Anne's late-night hospital vigil, 36 hours after William's emergency meetings, and just 12 hours before a scheduled and suddenly canceled medical briefing meant to reassure senior government officials. Coincidence or consequence? Because when a physician at that level walks out without ceremony, it means one thing. Something crossed a line. And according to two independent sources, that line was crossed during what insiders refer to as the third review. This wasn't a routine checkup. It was a full reassessment of the king's cognitive and neurological state, ordered quietly, urgently, and without Camilla present. Why without Camilla? Because William insisted. That alone should tell you everything. The third review was conducted in a secure medical suite, not at Buckingham Palace, but at Balmoral. Why Balmoral? Because it's where monarchs go when appearances no longer matter. It's where George VI went before the end. It's where Elizabeth chose to spend her final days. And now, it's where Charles was taken, under the cover of rest and reflection. But inside that stone fortress, nothing was restful. Here's what the review allegedly found. Not officially, not publicly, but documented. Cognitive lapses, increasing frequency, periods of confusion lasting minutes, then hours. Emotional volatility inconsistent with stress alone. And most concerning of all, episodes where Charles reportedly could not recall the current year. Think about that. A reigning monarch, unable to orient himself in time. Now ask yourself, if that's true, how long has the palace known? And why wasn't the public told? This is where the files come in. According to a journalist who later received an anonymous package, Dr. Whitcomb didn't just leave. She documented everything. Every test, every concern, every recommendation that was ignored. The package arrived in a padded envelope. No return address, just a typed label and a small USB drive taped inside. On it, a single folder, labeled simply Swan_3. Inside were documents dated months earlier than any official acknowledgement of serious illness, clinical notes, internal memos, and one chilling line highlighted in yellow. Patient remains cognitively present but declining. Recommend preparation for end-of-life care and succession contingencies. End of life. Not monitoring. Not precaution. End of life. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because the same file contained a response, not from a doctor, but from a senior palace official. And that response read, recommendation noted. Implementation deferred pending strategic considerations. Strategic considerations. What does that even mean when someone's life is on the line? It means optics. It means timing. It means the crown before the man. And for Dr. Whitcomb, that was the breaking point. One former aide described the confrontation that followed. A closed-door meeting. Voices raised. Whitcomb insisting that continued public appearances posed risk, not just to Charles, but to national stability. The official response. The country isn't ready. Let that sink in. Not the family isn't ready. Not the king isn't ready. The country. As if the truth itself were too dangerous to release. That night, Dr. Whitcomb went home. She didn't sleep. And by morning, she'd made her decision. She would no longer be complicit. So she resigned. And she documented everything. But why leak it? Why risk legal retaliation? Professional exile? Worse? Because, according to someone close to her, Whitcomb believed the truth would come out anyway. And when it did, the damage would be irreversible. She didn't want to be remembered as the doctor who stayed silent while a nation was misled. She wanted a record, a paper trail, something that would outlive spin. Now here's the contradiction. Despite the contents of Swan_3, the palace continued issuing statements describing Charles as engaged, alert, and focused on his duties. And to the casual observer, that might have seemed believable, until the videos, the slowed speech, the repeated phrases, the vacant pauses mid-sentence. Once you know what to look for, you can't unsee it. The signs were there, hidden in plain sight. And then there was the medication list. That's the part insiders say shocked even seasoned journalists. A combination of treatments not typically prescribed together. unless managing multiple severe conditions. Pain control, neurological stabilization, mood regulation. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't stress. This was management. Management of decline. So why didn't the palace acknowledge it? Because acknowledging it would trigger something they weren't ready for. A process, a shift, a countdown. And that countdown has a name. Operation Menai Bridge. But before we go there, there's one more piece of this puzzle you need to understand. One email, sent at 2:03 a.m. from Dr. Whitcomb to a private account belonging to Princess N. The subject line? He deserves honesty. No attachment, just words. And according to someone who saw and read it, she didn't respond. She just closed the laptop and cried. Because in that moment, and understood something devastating. The system she had defended her entire life, the system built on duty and silence, had chosen itself over her brother. And once that realization settled in, there was no going back. The palace thought the resignation would disappear. They were wrong. The files exist. The documents are real. And the clock? It's already ticking. But the most explosive detail in Swan_3 hasn't even been mentioned yet. A note dated weeks after the supposed diagnosis, written in a different hand, not a doctor's, not an aide's, but the king's, for words scribbled in the margin, for words that change everything. I know what's happening. And once you understand what Charles knew, and when he knew it, the next chapter becomes unavoidable. Because if the king knew, then what came next wasn't ignorance. It was a choice, and choices have consequences. I know what's happening. Those 4 words sat in the margin like a ticking bomb. Not typed, not dictated, handwritten, uneven, pressed hard enough to leave an imprint on the page beneath. According to the source who reviewed the file, the handwriting was unmistakable. The looping strokes, the slanted emphasis on the first word, the way the final G trailed off as if the hand had tired before the thought did. This wasn't speculation. This was awareness. The king knew. And that changes everything. Because up until this point, the palace narrative had leaned on a familiar defense, uncertainty, monitoring, tests, precautions. But that single sentence destroys that illusion. If Charles knew what was happening, then every smile, every wave, every carefully staged photograph afterward wasn't reassurance. It was performance. And suddenly, the question shifts from what were they hiding to something far more uncomfortable. Why were they hiding it? Let's go back to the note. It was written after a particularly grueling assessment, one that reportedly left Charles exhausted and irritable. According to the timeline embedded in the files, it followed a private consultation where Dr. Whitcomb laid out the trajectory plainly. Not sugar-coated, not softened. She told him the treatments would slow things, not stop them. She told him the episodes would worsen. And she told him, gently but firmly, that the role he carried might soon carry him instead. Charles listened, then asked a single question. How much time? Whitcomb didn't answer directly. Doctors rarely do. But she gave him a look. The kind of look that doesn't need translation. That's when he reached for the pen. I know what's happening. Now here's where it gets complicated. Because according to palace protocol, a monarch's medical awareness triggers a different set of obligations. Not legal, exactly. Ethical. If the sovereign is informed, then those closest to him are no longer protecting him by staying silent. They're protecting the institution. And that's a line and has never been comfortable crossing. After Whitcomb's resignation, the files show a sudden change in tone. Recommendations softened. Language adjusted. Phrases like urgent replaced with ongoing. End-of-life care quietly rephrased as advanced comfort measures. This wasn't medical evolution. It was editorial. Someone was rewriting reality. And then there's the meeting that no one was supposed to know about. Held late at night. No agenda. No minutes. Just a handful of people summoned to a secure room at Buckingham Palace. William was there. Camilla was there. 2 senior constitutional advisors. And one person who did not belong in that room. A media strategist. Why would a media strategist be present during a discussion about a king's medical decline? Unless the conversation wasn't about treatment. Unless it was about timing. According to a source familiar with the meeting, the discussion centered around 3 scenarios. Scenario 1. Immediate transparency. Rejected. 2. Destabilizing. Scenario 2. Partial disclosure. Rejected. Invites speculation. Scenario 3. Controlled silence until succession mechanisms are fully aligned. Approved. Unanimously. Except for one voice. Anne's. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She just said this. He's not a headline. He's my brother. And then she left the room. That moment matters. Because from that point forward, and stopped shielding the process. She didn't leak documents. She didn't call reporters. But she also didn't intervene when others did. And that's when the files began to move. The flash drive didn't go to just one journalist. Copies surfaced in different forms. A redacted excerpt here. A paraphrased memo there. Enough to build a picture. Enough to make denials look flimsy. And suddenly, the palace was playing defense. But here's the detail that most people missed. Buried deep in the metadata of one of the files was a timestamp that didn't match the official narrative. A scan dated weeks earlier than any public acknowledgement of concern, which means someone had known, and someone had acted, just not in public. That someone, sources say, was William. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. Because while Anne was grieving, and Camilla was reportedly pushing for silence, William was doing something else entirely. Preparing. Not emotionally. Structurally. He was meeting with legal advisors. Reviewing briefing books. Quietly studying the mechanics of regency, not as an abstract concept, but as an imminent reality. And that puts him in an impossible position. Because if he acts too early, he looks ambitious. If he acts too late, he looks unprepared. And in between, he looks like a son watching his father fade. The files show William requested a private medical briefing of his own. No press, no staff, just facts. And when he got them, he asked one question. Can he still decide? The answer, according to the notes, was cautious. Yes. For now. For now. Those two words carry weight. Because they imply a narrowing window. And what you do in that window defines history. Which brings us to the last page of the file. The one no one expected. A draft. Not medical. Not legal. Personal. Written by Charles himself. Not a will. Not a decree. A letter. Unfinished. Addressed simply. My dear. No name. Just dots. As if he hadn't decided who deserved to read it. Or perhaps, as if he had, but couldn't bring himself to finish. The body of the letter was brief, reflective, and devastating. I've had a lifetime to prepare for this role. I never imagined how little time I'd have to live it. If you're reading this, then something has already changed. I hope I've chosen wisely. Chosen. Not served. Not endured. Chosen. That word suggests agency. And agency suggests intention. Now ask yourself, if Charles knew, if he wrote that note, if he began drafting letters, what else did he put in motion? Because monarchs don't wait for the end. They prepare for it. And whatever Charles prepared, it wasn't meant for the press. It wasn't meant for ceremony. It was meant for someone specific. The palace may have believed the files would stay buried. They were wrong. Because once truth exists in more than one place, silence stops working. And now, with whispers turning into documents, and documents turning into questions, the next phase becomes inevitable. The palace isn't just managing health anymore. It's managing fallout. And the most dangerous fallout isn't public outrage. It's internal fracture. Because when doctors resign, when sisters refuse to lie, and when heirs begin preparing in silence, something bigger is coming. Something irreversible. And the files? They were only the beginning. Because what they triggered next wasn't medical. It was emotional. And it happened behind a locked door at Windsor, where Camilla finally broke. And what she did in that room left traces no one could erase. But that's the next chapter. And trust me, you won't be ready. How much pressure can one person take before they shatter? What happens when the woman once branded the other woman becomes the only one holding the crown together? And what if, deep down, she knows it's slipping through her fingers? Camilla, queen consort, once the most reviled woman in Britain. Now, suddenly, its most fragile protector. Behind every carefully arranged bouquet, every diplomatic visit, every tightly managed smile, there was something else. A storm. One that finally exploded, not in front of the cameras, but behind a thick oak door at Windsor Castle. And when it did, not even the palace walls could muffle the sound. This wasn't the Camilla we've come to know through press photos and polite interviews. This wasn't the queen consort attending ribbon cuttings or shaking hands with schoolchildren. This was the Camilla behind closed doors, raw, unraveling, and furious. It started as a whisper between staff. She slammed the door. She yelled at a butler. She hasn't left her private quarters in 2 days. But then came something more troubling. She threw something. A glass paperweight. It hit a portrait. Not just any portrait, but a formal oil painting of King Charles, painted for his 70th birthday. And in that moment, Camilla, the ever-patient, ever-poised, finally snapped. Why? Because she was the last to know. Or worse, she already knew, but no one listened. Let's rewind. 3 days before the breakdown, Camilla attended a small charity event in Kent. It was a low-key affair, a press-safe space. She wore a soft blue coat, spoke warmly to volunteers, and even smiled for cameras. But a sharp-eyed reporter noticed something strange. She clutched her handbag unusually tight. 2 hands, not one. Her speech stumbled once, and she mispronounced a name she'd said flawlessly for years. Then, after the final applause, she vanished, straight into a waiting car. No goodbyes, no photos, no waving, just gone. That evening, Camilla returned to Windsor ahead of schedule. Staff expected her to dine privately and rest. Instead, she called a meeting, a small one, for people, 2 aides, 1 physician, and Prince William. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. What was said inside has been pieced together through multiple leaks. But here's what several sources agree on. William presented her with updated medical documentation. He told her Charles's condition had entered a non-linear phase. Translation? The king's health was no longer predictable. One day might seem stable, the next, catastrophic. Camilla listened. She didn't interrupt. But when the meeting ended, she didn't say goodbye. She simply stood and walked away. That night, Camilla didn't sleep in her own suite. She requested the room adjacent to Charles's, the same one Diana had once used while visiting Windsor during formal functions. A royal aide reported seeing her pacing at 3 a.m., mumbling to herself, clutching a letter. We don't know what was written on that page, but we do know what came next. The following morning, breakfast was laid out as usual. Camilla never showed up. By noon, staff heard raised voices, glass breaking, furniture scraping against stone. One maid was reportedly reduced to tears after being told to leave a tray outside the door and not knock, not speak, not breathe. Then came the shouting. One phrase was heard, clear, sharp, unmistakable. You all lied to me. It's unclear who she was referring to. The doctors? William? The institution? Or worse, Charles himself? Because grief has a way of turning allies into enemies. By 4 p.m., Camilla emerged from the room, eyes swollen, hair unbrushed. She gave no orders, spoke to no one. She simply walked to the chapel, alone, and sat in the front pew. Witnesses say she remained there for over an hour, praying, processing, or maybe just unraveling in peace. Now here's the part that chills even seasoned palace insiders. After chapel, she returned to the royal apartment and requested all the drapes drawn shut. Not just in her quarters. In Charles's too. That's not protocol. That's mourning. And the king was still alive. Physically. But something inside Camilla had already accepted what the doctors hadn't yet declared. She wasn't just preparing to lose her husband. She was preparing to lose her role. Her future. Her place in history. Remember, Camilla's rise was never guaranteed. She was once a symbol of scandal, the subject of whispered jokes and tabloid venom. For decades, she was painted as the mistress who tore a family apart. But over time, she endured. Rebranded. Recast. From villain to consort. From outsider to insider. And now? Now she was facing the one thing she could not reframe. The loss of the man who had made all of that possible. And it was breaking her. Sources close to the Queen consort say she stopped eating full meals. She canceled 3 scheduled engagements without explanation. And then came the call to her sister, Annabelle. It was brief. 5 minutes. But witnesses say Camilla sobbed the entire time and repeated the same phrase again and again. It's happening. It's happening. As if saying it out loud would make it feel less real. The next day, Camilla made a decision that shocked everyone. She wrote a personal letter. Handwritten, sealed with her crest, and requested it be delivered directly to King Charles's personal valet. The contents of that letter remain a mystery, but an insider who saw it described the look on the valet's face when he read it. He went white, just white, like he'd seen a ghost. We don't know what Charles said in return, or if he even read it. His condition that week was reportedly deteriorating rapidly. Periods of clarity, then confusion. Moments of lucidity, followed by total disorientation. One doctor described it privately as a dimmer switch being slowly turned. And Camilla, the woman who'd stood beside him for half a century, was being asked to stand strong again. Smile for the cameras. Ignore the whispers. Manage the collapse. But she couldn't. Not anymore. That's why the portrait was shattered. That's why she stopped answering phone calls from the press secretary. That's why, according to one deeply placed source, Camilla began preparing her own letter of abdication. Yes, you read that right. A resignation. Not from the family, but from public life. From duty. From the monarchy. Her aides begged her to reconsider. They reminded her of her importance. Her duty. Her legacy. But her answer, reportedly, was heartbreaking. There's no crown without him. Only silence. And here's where the story takes a strange turn. Just days after Camilla's breakdown, a new name was quietly added to the senior advisory list for the monarchy's succession planning. Someone unexpected. Someone controversial. And the decision was made without Camilla's input. Her influence was already slipping. And in the shadows, another force was rising. But we'll get to that. Because first, we need to talk about Harry. About a plane. A late-night landing. And a meeting that wasn't supposed to happen. One that may have changed everything. Because the queen consort wasn't the only one falling apart. And the prodigal son? He was coming home. Not for reconciliation, but for something far more complicated. And maybe, far more dangerous. He said he was done. Done with the titles. Done with the protocols. Done with the firm. But at 2:14 a.m., under the cover of darkness and without a single camera crew in sight, Prince Harry stepped off a private jet at Heathrow Airport. No entourage. No Meghan. No press alert. Just a backpack, a driver who didn't make eye contact, and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in days. The prodigal prince had returned. But why? And why now? What did he know that we didn't? Let's back up. For weeks, speculation had mounted about Harry's silence. No interviews. No social media activity. No podcast appearances. For a man once accused of oversharing for profit, this kind of total quiet was not just unusual, it was strategic. Sources close to Montecito insiders claimed he was off the grid, focused on family, and exploring new projects. But now we know, he was planning a return, and not just a visit, a confrontation. Because according to multiple well-placed sources, Harry wasn't summoned to England. He came because of a single message, a voicemail, left on a secure line by someone who hadn't contacted him in over a year. Princess Anne. Yes, that Princess Anne. The same sister who once viewed Harry as reckless. The same one who reportedly refused to meet Meghan after the Oprah interview fallout. But now, Anne had reached out. And the message, though short, was loaded with emotion. He needs to see you. Before it's too late. That was it. No details. No explanations. Just a tone Harry hadn't heard in years. Urgency. Sadness. Finality. And it shook him. Because no one in the royal family used those words lightly. Before it's too late. Too late for what? To say goodbye? To forgive? Or to finally hear the truth? Harry didn't tell Meghan. Not at first. According to one insider, she was surprised and upset when he boarded the plane alone. But Harry reportedly insisted. This isn't about us. It's about him. He didn't book a commercial flight. He didn't inform the press office. He flew quietly, on a discreet jet previously used for humanitarian work. No frills, no markings. It landed in London at precisely 2:14 a.m. And within 20 minutes, he was in a black SUV headed toward Windsor. But here's where the story veers into strange territory. Because Harry never went to Frogmore Cottage. He went somewhere else. Somewhere no one expected. According to GPS tracking leaked by an anonymous whistleblower, Harry's car detoured to an address known to only a handful of royal insiders. The private entrance to Clarence House's old medical wing. Abandoned years ago, but recently reactivated. And for one very important reason. It's where Charles had been moved temporarily for comfort care. Away from the public, away from cameras. Even from Camilla. Yes, you heard that correctly. Sources say Camilla had not been informed about the location shift. That decision, made by Anne and William, to protect Charles, or to protect the monarchy, that's still unclear. Harry arrived just after 3 a.m. He entered alone. No aides, no staff. Just one royal guard opened the door and nodded. Inside, dim lights, the smell of antiseptic and roses, and down a narrow hallway. His father, sleeping, hooked up to machines, breathing slow, shallow. Charles didn't wake. But Harry stayed anyway. For hours. He sat beside the bed, just watching. His phone turned off. His eyes glassy. He whispered once. A single sentence. According to a nurse on rotation, it was this: "I don't care about the crown. I just want my dad." That moment, quiet, tragic, real, may have been the first time Harry felt human to the institution again. Not a headline. Not a liability. Not a threat. Just a son. By sunrise, Charles still hadn't woken. Harry left the room quietly. But as he stepped into the hallway, he was met by someone unexpected. William. No fanfare. No cameras. Just the two brothers. Alone. For the first time in years. They didn't speak at first. Just stared. You could cut the air between them with a knife. Until William finally said, "He asked for you." Harry nodded. His voice reportedly cracked. "I'm sorry it took me this long." William didn't respond. He simply opened the door and gestured. "Go back in." But Harry didn't. Not right away. Instead, he asked a question. A question that reportedly stunned William into silence. Has he already chosen who takes over? Now that is loaded, because it suggests Harry knew something more. That he had heard whispers. That maybe he wasn't just there to say goodbye. Maybe he was there to confirm a rumor. And William, ever the strategist, didn't deny it. He simply said, "We'll talk. Not here," and walked away. Later that day, Harry was seen entering a different royal property. The old lodge near Sandringham, where Queen Elizabeth used to spend quiet weekends. No press. No aides. Just one envelope under his arm. A royal seal. Red wax. Unbroken. What was inside? We don't know. But a source claims it came directly from Charles's bedside table. Something he asked to be delivered to Harry if he ever returned. And the title on the envelope? "To the one who stepped away." That's all. No name. No title. Just acknowledgement. And perhaps forgiveness. Harry spent another night in the UK. But he didn't attend any public functions. Didn't alert his security detail. Didn't see Camilla. He remained in isolation. Reading. Thinking. Processing. And then he left. Quietly. No statement. No photos. No fanfare. Just gone. Back across the Atlantic. Back to a different kind of life. But not before he left something behind. A sealed envelope of his own. Marked for Charles. Unopened. Unsent. Waiting. That moment. Father and son, one unconscious, the other grieving. Maybe the last time they see each other. It may be the moment everything shifted. Not just emotionally, but strategically. Because if Charles truly left Harry a letter, and if Harry responded in kind, then the monarchy isn't just facing grief. It's facing a potential reckoning. One written not in press releases, but in private words. Exchanged in silence. Between a king and the son who walked away. But Harry's return wasn't the only secret flight that week. Another plane was seen departing from Scotland, carrying documents, aides, and someone believed to be carrying a red diplomatic bag. Its destination? Undisclosed. But its contents? Contained the next chapter in the royal drama. Because Operation Menai Bridge, the code name for King Charles's final transition, had just been activated. And part of that plan, leaked, by someone inside. And what it revealed wasn't just shocking. It was terrifying, because it confirmed what many feared. Charles's funeral wasn't just being planned. It was already being rehearsed. In silence, behind blacked-out windows, and with a crown already being polished for someone else. It's a place built for solitude, for privacy, for endings. Balmoral Castle, the royal family's most sacred retreat, nestled in the Scottish Highlands, framed by fog, pine trees, and secrets that never reached the tabloids. But beneath its stone walls, behind one specific door, down a corridor not listed on any official blueprints, lies a room. Not just any room. A hospice. One that was never meant to exist, but was quietly created for one terrifying reason. The king is dying. And this is where he's spending his final days. Most people think of Balmoral as the royal summer escape. Barbecues with the queen. Horse rides with the grandchildren. Tartan, bagpipes, and fresh air. But what few know is that in the last 18 months, Balmoral underwent a series of renovations. Officially, they were described as upgrades to accommodate accessibility. But according to 3 separate insiders, the work was far more specific. One section of the East Wing, long abandoned, was refitted, with hospital-grade oxygen systems, with reinforced privacy barriers, with a specialized lift wide enough for medical gurneys. And at the center of it all, a room known only as the Swan Suite. Why Swan? Because of an old royal code system. In the 1980s, the palace adopted avian code names to discreetly refer to medical conditions. Sparrow for minor injuries, Falcon for cardiac, and Swan for end of life. Graceful, elegant, and sinking in silence. That's what this suite was built for. And now, it's occupied by a king. Let's talk about how he got there. Because King Charles wasn't moved to Balmoral in a traditional ambulance convoy. He was flown in, late at night, by royal helicopter, under heavy fog. No press, no fanfare, just a coded call from Windsor to the landing pad crew. Swan 3 is inbound. Prepare the path. According to a pilot who later broke ranks, the king was unconscious for most of the journey. Camilla was not on board. Neither was William. Just 2 doctors, 1 nurse, and Princess Anne. Always Anne. She sat beside him, gloved hand resting gently over his, mouthing prayers. No tears, just stillness. The room itself is unlike anything the public has ever seen. Not opulent, not grand. Soft amber lighting, an antique bed, reinforced. Monitors hidden behind elegant cabinetry. A private exit that leads straight to the forest. No cameras, no corridors filled with staff. Just silence. It's where Charles wakes, and sometimes doesn't. It's where he murmurs names from the past. Diana, Camilla, even Papa, when he confuses himself with his younger self. It's where, and reads to him, Churchill's speeches, Kipling, bits of Shakespeare. It's where his once razor-sharp mind now flickers like a candle in the wind. Sources say the hospice was Charles's decision, that he didn't want to die in London, that he didn't want the noise, the pressure, the constant worry about how it would look, that he wanted to fade, not fall. And Balmoral offered that. It's where his mother died, after all. It's where he last felt like a son, not a sovereign. And now, it's where he wants to say goodbye. But not everyone agreed. Camilla reportedly fought the move. She believed Windsor was more appropriate, more controllable, more secure. But Charles insisted. And when and backed him, the debate ended. Because when it comes to the crown, Charles is still king, at least in name. Now here's where things get chilling. A nurse assigned to the Swan Suite described an eerie moment during her first night on shift. Charles was asleep and had gone for a walk. The monitor was steady. But then, suddenly, Charles spoke. Clearly, deliberately, as if delivering a speech. Tell them I'm still here. But not for long. Not long. Then silence. His eyes never opened. He didn't say another word for hours. But that one phrase rattled the nurse so deeply, she requested a new post the next morning. She never went back. Why does this matter? Because the palace is still pretending Charles is working remotely. That he's resting. That he's reading state papers. But the truth? He can no longer hold a pen. He no longer recognizes certain staff. He speaks in fragments. And sometimes, he doesn't speak at all. The king is not working. He is waiting. For the end. And for someone to tell the world. So why hasn't that happened? Why hasn't the palace issued a formal medical update? Why hasn't William stepped up? The answer lies in a dangerous contradiction. Charles is technically alive, but functionally absent. He's not ruling. He's not abdicating. He's suspended. A monarch in limbo. And as long as no one declares otherwise, the machine continues. For now. But someone leaked a photo. A blurry, almost unrecognizable image. Snapped through a crack in the curtains by a staffer who has since disappeared from the castle. It shows Charles in bed. Eyes open, but unfocused. Hands resting over a tartan blanket. And beside him, a letter. With William's crest. Not opened. Just sitting there. Unread. Unanswered. The photo never made it to the tabloids. But it circulated in dark corners of the internet. And once seen, never forgotten. Because it's not just a picture of a man near death. It's a picture of a man the world still thinks is ruling. And that makes it explosive. In response, Balmoral went into lockdown. No visitors. No phones. Staff rotated in 4-hour shifts.